Okay. I want to remind everyone that this event is in webinar format. That means you can see and hear our presenters, but they cannot hear or see you, which is a little bit different than what we've been doing this morning. This workshop is eligible for 1 hour of MCLE credit and 1 hour of MC3 continuing education credit. If you are requiring MCLE credit for this event, please make sure that the name that is displayed for you is a name that matches your state bar. If you did not provide us with your state bar number during registration, please send us an email. This webinar is also being recorded. You will receive an email sometime next week with a recording along with the handouts for this workshop. I would now like to introduce to you Steve Newman, who is our host for this workshop.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gray Divorce, Mediating Financial Challenges and Opportunities. As a CPA and mediator myself, I'm excited to learn how to solve the financial challenges posed by a gray divorce, not least of which is taking a big financial hit late in life and unwinding a very long-term marriage. If anyone can find solutions to these issues, it is our presenters. Lily Vasilev is a certified financial planner, master analyst in financial forensics, and a certified divorce financial analyst. Lily is a nationally recognized expert practitioner, speaker, writer, and author of 3 books, Money and Divorce, The Essential Roadmap to Mastering Financial Decisions, published by the American Bar Association, The Ultimate Divorce Organizer, The Complete Interactive Guide to Achieving the Best Legal, Financial, and Personal Divorce, and The Divorce Planner Checklist. She has received numerous awards, including the CEO Today 2018 Businesswoman of the Year Award. Lori Itkin is a financial advisor, wealth manager, and certified divorce financial analyst. She's the author of the Amazon bestseller, Every Woman Should Know Her Options, Invest Your Way to Financial Empowerment. Investopedia named Lori one of the top 100 most influential financial advisors in the country. Lori frequently appears as a guest expert on investing and personal finance on television, radio, and podcasts. She has also been quoted in numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, and Forbes. Let's welcome our distinguished presenters.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much. Before we get started with our presentation, Nancy from Family Law Software is supposed to give a demo. She is online here. I'm assuming she may not have the panelist login. So what we'll do is I'll have Bouvier and Nancy sort that out, and Nancy will bring you on at the end to do your demo, if that works.
Here she is.
Oh, she's here.
Yeah.
Here I am.
Yay.
So sorry. I guess I came in the wrong door.
Welcome here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so pleased on behalf of Family Law Software to welcome all of you to this great presentation. The presenters today, I mostly know from their use of Family Law Software and work with them, so I know how much they have to offer. Family Law Software is a great program for working with clients in mediation to really help them look at their options, both in terms of the financial picture as it is right now and also projections into the future. When we're talking about gray divorce, very often the question of security is one of the biggest elements for those clients. So we can do things like division of community property. We have a great dynamic worksheet here that we can move things around and say who's going to get what, and it'll automatically do the percentages and make sure you're okay. We can look at after tax scenarios, and we also have the ability to look at different property valuations when that's an issue. And that's in addition to all of our great maintenance tools and the tools for calculating support and the court forms that are built in, so that you can automatically generate declarations. But not only that, you can have it set up so that you as the mediator don't have your name on those papers. They can file them pro se. That's Family Law Software in a 2-second nutshell. Anybody who's interested, we are offering, if you order from the conference, a waiver of the $99 setup fee. you can email me directly at nancy.schaefer@familylawsoftware.com, and I'll put that in the questions as well. Thanks.
And I'd like
Thank
to
you.
make an endorsement for Family Law Software. Nancy knows me. She's always available at conferences to answer questions, and I use it in my practice all the time. And it's just a phenomenal tool, and I think it's a good value too.
Ditto.
All right, I am going to share the slides. Oh, no, I don't want to press leave. Okay. All right. Can everyone see? Good, we've got some good nods. All right, so Lily and I are going to be tag teaming on this presentation, and you've come, if you were at the last presentation about millennial divorce, we're now going to be talking about the other end of the spectrum, the gray divorce. And I just want to start with a quick anecdote. I was called yesterday by a 68-year-old woman who is contemplating divorcing her 84-year-old husband. So here we are, gray divorce. It's here. Okay, let me see if I can, wait a minute, I'm trying to make the slides go. There we go. Okay, so Lily, you're on. Oh, let me just say one thing, I'm sorry, before. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions rather than the chat. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold off questions until the end. And Steve Newman will be looking at some of the questions, keeping track, and we'll be addressing them at the end. So again, use the Q&A. Just know that you may not be answered until the end of the presentation. Okay, Lily, you're on.
Well, it's our great pleasure to present today, and I have to say we have so much material to get through, which is why we're asking to hold some of the questions until the end. But really the learning objectives for today are the key challenges that late life divorce presents to our clients. And what is most significant about this is that these are decisions that have a very long-lasting impact, and it's really on the cusp of retirement years, which also is a simultaneous transition for these clients, not just financially, but also emotionally. So we are going to present some of those key challenges that you can identify early on with your clients. Secondly, what are the right questions? What do we need to ask our clients? Not just about what their needs and their interests and their priorities are for the divorce, but a little bit past that, if not longer. And then we're going to really outline for you the potential landmines that occur in key financial areas for our clients at this stage in their life, and why they complicate what might otherwise be a pretty straightforward divorce if these clients were younger. And lastly, we'd like to enhance the probability, of course, of our clients' financial security post-divorce, and give you a little bit of some strategy as to how you can maximize that outcome for them so it's sustainable and practical.
All right, so this is what we're going to cover today. And as Lily said, we've got a lot of meat to cover. We're going to talk about the trends that we're seeing in our practices in late life divorce, and what we've also been reading and researching. And of course, the landmines in late life divorce, the financial landmines. It's been, because of the pandemic, valuing businesses has been a very challenging aspect. And we have some ideas on how you might want to approach that with your clients if one or both spouses is a small business owner. Then we want to talk about Social Security claiming strategies. We're not recommending that you need to become an expert in those, but you should be aware of the issues about different strategies of when to claim, and all the issues if you're divorced, and when to do it, and how that might impact the future cash flow of your clients, because you want to know what that might be, and they certainly want to know what that might be. And then I'm going to spend some time on equity compensation, because we're dealing with people in their 50s and 60s who are not yet retired, particularly in my state of California, and many of you are from California. restricted stock units are a huge component of people's incomes and sometimes options, and property division and income available for support are some of the big issues.
And I'm just going to say it's almost ironic because I just went through a late life divorce on the cusp of retirement, and there were so many layers of retirement benefits for this executive that each one of them had separate trigger events and taxation for the soon-to-be ex-spouse. It was a challenge in itself. But here are some of the late life divorce trends. We've been hearing this over and over again. Why is gray divorce in the news? It's in the news because the rates have doubled in the last decade. And that is in contrast to the general population, where the divorce trends and rates have been pretty stagnant since the late 1970s, 80s. And it's interesting because it's in the breakup of long-term first marriages, those marriages that are longer than 20 years, 25 years, 35 years. The one I just spoke about was 32 years. And more than 55% of these gray divorces are even longer than the 25, 30 years. Now, having said that, keep this in mind. Not all gray divorces are evenly spread out among the demographics. And you need to pay attention to what the challenges are that we're going to talk about today, given the socioeconomic status of what your clients have, and make sure that you address the issues appropriately for them and not apply these generalities to every one of your cases, which I'm sure you will not do. But I also want to mention that the reason we look forward post-divorce is because most divorce boomers don't end up living alone. And that has significant impact on the future support and perhaps on what we do to preserve and protect their wealth going forward. Surprisingly, more women at this age in life initiate divorce. And why? Same reasons almost you hear across the board. I need fulfillment. I have never been happy in my marriage. I have a long life ahead of me and it's my turn. The kids are growing. And yet, the number one worry for these people is generally about money. My oldest divorce client I have to share with you was 98 years old. And that was extraordinary. And there were questions around mental competency, but I can assure you she was sharper than a whip. So what is the worry when you are getting to this older stage in life? Well, most individuals are going to worry about income and how to divide it between two households and what will be required to support two households. There's also going to be a concern about spending, and healthcare is always the top issue in this, and how and when are we going to have to downsize? Thirdly, there's anxiety about when the employed spouse will choose, opt, or be forced to retire, and what happens when one of them or both of them are no longer earning income. And then there's the apprehension about achieving financial independence. Keep this in mind, there is a wide spectrum of gray divorce. There are the earlier at 50, and then there are the later 60, 65, 70-year-old people. And many of those individuals have been out of the workforce for a long period of time. And the idea that they become financially independent, no longer check off a box that they're a married couple, that's been their identity for 30 years, is terrifying for these people. And there's a whole host of emotions that then surround that. So we need to be very respectful of what these individuals go through when they're going through this process. Okay, Laura. So as we mentioned, all of these factors are kind of hitting these individuals at the same time. They are going through a transition in their life. Their children are aging, going to college. They may be taking care of their own older parents. They're thinking about, are they at their peak in their earning career? Are they at risk of losing their job? Have they saved enough for retirement? What are the expectations of these individuals? And it's multifaceted in terms of how we work patiently with them to get them through one step to the next step. And again, the financial issues are overriding, but there is so much under the water there in terms of emotion and expectation of what they expect being divorced and being in later years. So here are some really, really important questions to ask clients. And these are not the same kinds of questions you would be asking younger individuals. Are they realistic about alimony and duration? Meaning, if you're 64, how long do you think you will be receiving spousal support if your soon-to-be ex-employed spouse is anticipating retiring within 2 years and you've been married for 30? It's a very rude awakening for a lot of these clients to think, you mean I'm not going to have support for the rest of my life? So gently introduce reality. Secondly, how are they going to replace earned income or support when they're in their later years? And this is where we have great value added to the process of how we come in and we look at every possible strategy for squeezing income and cash flow from things, from assets or income that could be repositioned better and give them a greater sense of confidence in what they could rely on in later years. And how
if I can interject there,
Sure.
Just in my experience working on cases, I mean, when we have, let's say the wife wants to keep the house and she's going to give up other assets in exchange for that. Well, if she's giving up other assets, she's losing an ability to generate investment income from those assets. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle that you've got to fit in there. How are we going to allocate the assets fairly such that some can be income generating for this very purpose?
And you know what? There are new tricks out there. I'll be honest, right? So if a client actually wanted to retain the house and then had very diminished liquidity, what do we pull out of our toolkit? We have some strategies that we can talk about, but often that's where we add that tremendous amount of value. So it's not just black and white, and it's not the character of the asset as it looks to be, that we can then probe deeper as to what they may need. And most importantly, these individuals who have planned or not planned for retirement based on where they've come from, always ask the question, doesn't my spouse owe me a long-term care insurance policy now that I'm going to be on my own? And the answer is maybe, right? It all comes down to affordability and eligibility. And are they here's the other million-dollar question, are they planning for cohabitation or remarriage? I know it's a personal question. I know it has no bearing on what the divorce process is, but keep in mind, we're here to be strategists for helping them plan going forward. And they need to know the pros and cons of whatever they're planning in the future so that they make the appropriate decisions now that can impact their financial well-being. Now, I've had many situations where clients may not know what's in their best interests and they don't know what their priorities are, but they have a sense of fairness or they have a sense of what's equitable between the two of them. And it may surprise you to ask that simple question. What do you think is fair for the two of us to have as a starting point the minute we are both divorced? Or in terms of a little bit longer down the road, what is it that you think is fair at the end of X period of time, 5 years, 10 years? And I've had clients who have asked me to really look forward to say, is it that I want to have the same amount of wealth in terms of assets to be invested so that I know I have a net worth of X in 10 years? Or is it cash flow at the moment that we're both divorced? And so to go through a little bit of that stair-stepping on the goals is very intriguing because they both will have a very different perspective of what they suddenly think is fair. Is it a cash flow issue? Is it a net worth issue? Is it the ability to move on and purchase other things? And that conversation takes place, I would suggest, when you're looking at their concerns about maximizing income and dividing the assets. So it's fairly early on about getting this sense of fairness. And then there's always the other piece, which is, are there hidden treasures? And when I say hidden treasures, I always think to myself, if you just look a little bit harder, can you find something that they haven't thought about? And often it could be reward points that they could use instead of using cash to go on a vacation. It could be exchanging a timeshare so that they can get their value from that. It could be tax loss carry forwards to shelter future profits from selling property or capital gains on investments. All of those can really add up and accumulate and should never be overlooked. And I think one of the things that Lori's going to talk about are unvested assets. And those should never be overlooked either, because you just don't know. So what often will impact a decision for making a decision for dividing the assets has to do with how much you can open and be transparent about in terms of sharing with your clients, so that they can get maybe a better idea of how to maximize what exists and not be so fearful. The landmines. The landmines are numerous. The fact is, the older you are, the more complicated your financials are. And at this stage in life, we're talking about really in your late 50s or early 60s, you're probably at your peak earning capacity and you're working really hard. And you've got college tuitions to take care of that probably cost a whole lot more than what your house is worth. Maybe you're in the sandwich generation where you're also taking care of your elderly parents. You may have adult children who have boomeranged back home and are living off of you, not doing much to look for a career on their own. And especially with pandemic, I have had number of clients who have said, oh my God, my kids are like mooching off of us and our grocery bills are astronomical. And there are other adult children who spend down assets. They just don't seem to understand the limits and or understand the stressors that go along with gray divorce. Skyrocketing health insurance premiums, medical issues that require a lot more time and concern during this process to make sure that individuals have a safety net that they can rely upon when they are divorced. One of the more interesting things that has happened with the pandemic is that a lot of folks have dropped out of the workforce. And why? Well, the obvious answer is health risks and economic disruptions to whatever the businesses they were in. Unfortunately, many older women who have been out of the workforce for a long period of time and may have just had part-time jobs are really often the first targeted to be downsized and or let go. And that goes along with most part-time service workers. And they also have a very difficult time finding employment after this economy recovers. Many of these individuals who could not afford to retire and had these jobs to make income are actually being forced into early retirement. And I had a couple who were divorcing in their late 50s, and he lost his job after, 30 years. And he literally had no idea what to do. And he went to work for a tax preparer, down on your local street, making $20 a tax return. It's a tough time for individuals who don't know how to retool themselves and are caught short on their savings. There are other individuals who are being resilient and finding that this doesn't seem to faze them at all. And they're more worried about their adult children or their millennials than they are about themselves, because they've saved well, they have accumulated their wealth, and they're less likely to be struggling. And many of them are actually turning into entrepreneurs and taking advantage of this time to start new businesses and do something that they're really passionate about, and feeling that they're financially secure and that this was the perfect time to do it.
So it's interesting because we have the slides, we have the red negative, we have the green positive. Now I'm going to make this red again, because I know where I am in San Diego, I'm a member of a co-working community for women. And so often women who've been out of the workforce, who've been a stay-at-home parent, decide, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to be a life coach, or I'm going to be a divorce coach. We got a lot of that. I'm going to be a nutrition coach. I'm going to start a business. And the other spouse, both of them may have unrealistic expectations of what you can earn. If you've been out of the workforce a long time, it's a real high, it takes a certain kind of person and discipline to become an entrepreneur to actually be profitable in the next 3 years. So I see a lot in my cases that one spouse will say, well, the other spouse can start the business and generate $50,000, $70,000. We have to be very realistic about that when it comes to spousal support.
One of the great challenges, I think, for all of us is what happens to a business valuation during this pandemic. And I have spoken with a number of different business valuation experts. And here are the risks, right? It's understanding the effect of choosing a valuation date to use. Because if there's been a decrease in the business value, whether it's in the revenues or the earnings or the asset values or whatever, will that then be recouped in the near future, in the longer future, if ever? And the other risk in this is the marketability. Let's just pretend you don't even want to stay in business. Could you sell it? And the third one is the risk on the cash flow and the cost of capital to finance yourself to even fund future growth. So many of these business valuations are doing on an if and then basis, where they're coming back to do a second swipe at it to do a comparison and to see if, in fact, the effects of COVID have made the business itself uncertain, and if it's affected and impacted the return on the business, and of course, the value for the non-employed or non-business owner spouse. And what's interesting about this is that it not only affects the business value, but of course, it gives rise to the question of double dipping, which are critical determinants in late life divorce. And double dipping is by taking the income that is allocated to the owner of the business and then counting that income as part of the value of the business at the same time. And when we're going through this pandemic, we're now even having to separate out a third piece, which is our next slide, which are, the loans that are granted during this pandemic. And I'll let Lori handle the next one.
Okay, thanks, Lily. Okay, PPP loans. Again, I work with so many small businesses and small business clients, and so everybody and their mother has been applying for PPP loans. If you're a solopreneur, if you're a small business, if you're a consultant, many of you here today may have applied for PPP loans. Okay, so I was so intrigued with this issue, and Lily, when we were discussing our presentation, Lily said we've got to address this. And so I actually attended a Cal CPA all-day seminar on some of these issues. And I wanted to know, how are the CPAs dealing with the PPP loans? How are the forensic accountants in divorce dealing with this PPP loans? And, the issue is, if you received a PPP loan and you used that so you could keep employees on payroll, it's reducing either your expenses or it's plugging in income that you wouldn't have had because of the pandemic. How are we treating this? Is this income available for support? What if the loan isn't forgiven? I mean, we all walk in here assuming our PPP loans will be forgiven, but they may not be. And if they are forgiven, when? So here you are as a mediator, you're trying to negotiate spousal support, maintenance, alimony, and you really don't have a good idea of how to determine what is the income available for support from this business. And, this isn't a good answer, but it's the same answer Lily had on the last slide. You may very well have to have these parties come back to the table in a quote unquote normal year, whether that's 2022. So, I mean, what I'm hearing as a strategy is that perhaps negotiating some sort of temporary support, and then the clients agree to come back to mediation 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and perhaps look at the numbers and redo. I know it's difficult, but there's really, if you don't do it that way, you are shortchanging one of your clients.
And I would just add that I have a client right now who the working spouse took a PPP loan and now wants to reduce the child support obligation. And the question is, is their disposable income. And nothing has changed in the lifestyle of that person receiving the PPP loan. And so here we are. You know, what do you point to is the question.
And everyone has a good argument, right? There's no right answer here.
Of course, whatever shoe you wear. Yeah.
Right. All right, so we're going to reverse course or go on to Social Security claiming strategies. We're not going to go into detail on this. There's a handout. You can study this later, but the whole point, I'll just do this briefly. Certain people who are older, if one of your clients was born before 1954, they are able to take advantage of what's called the spousal restricted application. And so you'll see anyone after that age can't do it. But the whole point this slide shows, and this was something I got from Fidelity, your clients are always going to be thinking, do I claim Social Security at 62 when I can, but I'll get less for the rest of my life? Should I wait till FRA, which is the full retirement age, which could be 66 or 67, depending on when they were born? Should I wait until I'm 70 and get full retirement? And how do I, if I am divorced and I've been married 10 years to my spouse, is it better to claim my own benefit or half of my spouse's benefit? And what are the strategies to do this? And what there's a woman named Mary Beth Franklin who has made herself, you know, she's the total expert on Social Security claiming strategies. And what you do need to be aware of is that, you know, every few years, some of these rules can change. So it's something to stay on top of. And the whole point of this is that when you're trying to talk about support issues, it's very good to know what the clients may be able to get from Social Security. A free way to get some information, and I tell all my clients, is go to ssa.gov, which is the Social Security Administrative website. You may have your full work history there. You can do estimates. Anything else, Lily, that you want to add to this?
Well, I think why it may be very important is that a 2018 study by Nationwide came out and said that 62% of women expect Social Security to be their primary source of income. Now, when you think about that, the maximum Social Security amount, if they were 100% on their own record, was $45,000 last year. If they're on their ex-spouse's record, it's 50% of that. So it seems like an incredible statistic to me to know that. And the importance of that, again, comes back to the fact that if they have to work past normal retirement age, what are their opportunities? If they expected to work past normal retirement age, are they actually going to be able to do so? And I just put some statistics in here to show you that while their expectation says, oh yeah, I'd love to work through retirement age and do something I would be passionate about and contribute to society and make me happy, you know, maybe it's not even realistic and or going to happen. And, you know, the other side to that is, I think they need to understand that if they do have the opportunity to work past retirement age, what does that mean if they are receiving support or Social Security? And by the way, if they do remarry, there's a suspension of 1 year of them receiving Social Security on their ex-husband's benefit or ex-wife's benefit. So they go without income for a whole year from that benefit and have to reapply on a new spouse's record.
And let's talk about tax. If you are working and collecting Social Security, you may find that more of your Social Security is taxable. So that's an impact. We also have the issues about pensions and Social Security. Let's say you have a client who's a teacher and is covered by the CalSTRS pension. He or she has, you know, contributed 8% of the salary into that pension. They're not going to get Social Security, but their ex-spouse might get Social Security. So you have all these issues of parity, and you may not have control over some of those. You certainly can't tell the Social Security Administration how much to give your client, but you need to be aware of these puzzle pieces. And it's helpful to work with a CDFA to map some of this out for future cash flow.
Actually, I had a challenge just like that from a teacher who wanted to equalize the teacher benefits with the Social Security benefits of their soon-to-be ex-spouse. And believe me, it is complicated to go through. And I was an expert in court testifying to it. It's very detailed, extremely detailed.
All right. New issue here, and let me just look at the time because I can go as deep okay. So what I'm going to do is, we thought this was an important issue because I said earlier, you know, when you're working with later life divorce, there's usually more assets to consider, and with so many more people, with so many companies providing equity compensation. If you work for a publicly traded company like a Google, Facebook, Amazon, Qualcomm, Viasat, you name it, Pfizer, you probably get restricted stock units. What we're seeing less, we used to see more of these 10, 15, 20 years ago where there'd be more options versus restricted stock, but we're still seeing options, particularly in a privately held company. We've got all these people working for startups that are getting options. And then you may also find that your clients are enrolled in what's called an ESPP, an employee stock purchase program. That's very different than these RSUs or options. And sometimes mediators aren't totally aware of the differences of all these different animals, but they are definitely treated differently when you're trying to determine, in California, the community property portion. And also Lily, you're not in a community property state, but you still have equitable distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you may have come across incentive stock options, which are totally treated differently. So I want to focus mostly on restricted stock units and options. And the big question is this property to be divided? Is it income available for support? Or is it both? You know, it's so interesting. If you're a new mediator and you haven't worked in some of this stuff, you may get a W-2. You know, your client has to provide the tax returns and the W-2, and you may say, wow, this woman earned $500,000 last year. Well, how much of that was her salary, a cash bonus, and maybe she had a bunch of RSUs that vested that year? And you're seeing the gross amount. These things are taxed at a very high level, and you're seeing the gross amount and thinking there's all this money available for support, but we've got to spread the curtains open. Okay. Okay. So in California, there's case law on this. I understand that New York uses a similar formula to the Nelson formula. It's called, is it called Jesus?
No. Oh, De Jesus, yes.
Or De Jesus, okay. And then there's another one?
No.
Okay, all right. So basically what you don't have to study these formulas right now, you'll have the handout, but in most cases that I work with, it's the Nelson formula. And let me just give you an example. A wife joins Amazon. She's given as part of her offer letter, salary bonus, and she'll have, let's say she gets 1,000 RSUs, restricted stock units, that vest 25% over 4 years. So each year, some stock is going to be vest that she then owns and can sell if she wants. Here's the deal. This is the conundrum. Anything that was awarded and vested prior to the date of separation. In California, we use the date of separation. Other states, you may use a later date, like the date of divorce or date of trial. We use the date of separation, and we know plenty of people have been separated for years.
Yeah.
So if the RSUs or the options were granted before marriage and they vested, if they were granted before the date of separation and vested before the date of separation, they're community property 100%. And if they were granted after the date of separation, they're that employee's separate property. Where I come in, where I do so much work for mediators, is figuring out the middle stuff. She was granted awards that partially vested before separation, will continue to vest after separation and maybe after the divorce. How do we divide the property? The other spouse gets some of those shares when they vest. And what about those separate property shares that now are showing up on her W-2 as income? Are those available for child and spousal support? Those are the issues we deal with. More and more of my cases are dealing with these issues. And I've seen a lot of mistakes made. Okay, so, and this is funny because I'm on Zoom here, I can't even see my slides with all the stuff, but I think I talked about this, yes. Okay, so what we try to determine is if it's a little easier to divide them, the property. And what this means is that your spouses, your clients may have to be communicating with each other years after the divorce because they have to allocate when the stock vests and is available, the other spouse may be entitled to a portion of that stock, okay? Some people like to try to negotiate a buyout where the employee will keep all the future stock, but that is far from accurate. You really can't put a value on that. And we don't have time to go into why that is. But most cases that I work on, there's a deferred distribution. Now then, if over time, only some of those shares are being given or transferred to the other spouse as property, then you have separate property shares that may be available for support. What percentage should we use for child and or spousal support? And this is a biggie. Should this be capped to reflect the lifestyle of the marriage? Let's say you had two spouses that were working, whatever, and one worked or both worked, and all of a sudden, near the date of separation, as the marriage is starting to erode, one person gets all these new RSUs, they got a new job, and now they're going to have potential, they may even have a lower salary, but they're getting more equity compensation. Should we be looking at capping spousal support to reflect the lifestyle of the marriage? Should the non-employee spouse be getting a windfall? Now, certainly for child support, at least in California, yes, the children should, share in that lifestyle. But what about spousal support? These are the issues that come up. Okay, tax issues when RSUs vest. Here's what I just want from a high level. In most cases, but it's going to depend on the incomes and the tax brackets. But what I see in my practice, in most cases, when the stock vests, usually companies take out 40.88%. So let's call it 41%. So it may look like the employee is getting $100,000 invested stock, but after income and employment taxes are withheld, they're only getting $51,000 in stock that then is available to transfer to the other spouse. So you've got to look at net shares. Also, in high net worth situations, we may have the company under withholding taxes. And then when they have to file their tax return the next year, they owe all this money. Oh, oops, what if that's after they're now filing as single? Okay, so that kind of thing. So that's a very big issue. It's also a big issue. Go ahead.
Lori, I just wanted to ask you, do you typically do accounting true-ups in your agreements and or the clawback?
Okay, so I haven't had to deal with any clawback issues, but yes, I've been asked to do true-ups because the non-employee spouse wants to have a third party knowing that they're getting what's due. Can you talk about a clawback that you've had to deal with?
Well, this actually happened in 2009, 2010, where you had Wall Street bonuses and Wall Street options, and people were all granted them on an if basis. And when the companies actually outlined clawback, that they had the right to take back bonuses and or options within a 5-year period because of the financial issues that all these companies were going through, and several did. And these were high-flying executives that had a lot taken out from what they thought was their net worth after the fact. So we had to write it into a lot of agreements, the clawback piece.
Meaning that if you've already allocated some of the property to the ex-spouse and now you owe it back to the company, you've got to claw it back from the ex-spouse.
And that's always such a pleasure.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm not going to go into this. This is the kind of spreadsheets that I prepare, and every CDFA has their own style of preparing them. You know, we work on these cases, we get better, we fine tune, but there's a lot of calculations when you're trying to figure out how much is property. You've got to deal with the after-tax division of property, and then you've got to think about how many shares are available for support. So, and sometimes in a lot of the cases that I work on, you may have let the sleeping dog not be disturbed, because sometimes these aren't even considered in the form of support. They may only be considered as property division or just support. I've seen it all ways. I mean, we know what the case law states, but that doesn't necessarily mean in your mediated case that you're gonna follow that. It may not be necessary. Okay, the only point I wanted to use on this slide, and this was a real case I worked on, is, and I think Lily alluded to this. So this case, in this spreadsheet, we have options, and you see my yellow and my arrow here. When we looked at this, while they were negotiating their divorce, there were all these options that were underwater, and the company was Viasat. And what it means by underwater is that, and the employee was a very high-ranking executive there, and when these options were awarded, the stock price was really high. And now, as the options have vested and she can actually exercise the options and acquire stock, they were underwater, meaning that they were worth nothing today, theoretically worth nothing today. Now, and I see this all the time, the employee spouse says, oh, they're not worth anything. They're so underwater. We ignore them. I don't have to negotiate about these. You don't want them, spouse. You don't want them. They're worth nothing, right? Right, Lily? And then we found out, as I was working on this case, all of a sudden the Viasat stock popped up. Boom, all of a sudden, shit, these are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Excuse my French, I get so excited.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank God they had a CDFA on the team, although maybe the employee spouse didn't like that so much. I was a neutral in the case. So again,
I think many people are frightened of trying to understand how to value these. And the question is maybe not how to value them, but how to share them. And if and when they come into value, of course, then they have a value. But never overlook something that just doesn't have a value at the moment, and or that could be actually vested upon termination and or upon retirement, when they all vest instead of having a schedule. And that's the other kicker. You know, they say, oh, I have 10 years until these vest, or I have whatever. And then they retire and they become fully vested upon retirement. So make sure you read the plans.
yes, there are
And I wanted to add one other thing, because there's a middle ground between looking at them as property and or as income. Many RSUs actually pay dividends, and that dividend income could be attributed to income. So you kind of got a middle part there.
That's very true. If you take something like Qualcomm, well, the stock is really high right now, but for most of the years when it was trading lower, it was paying a 4%, almost a 4% dividend. So, and actually the employees at Qualcomm, even though they don't own the stock yet, it's not vested, they're being credited with dividends. So I mean, we can get in deep in the weeds in these cases as much as you want. And anyway, this talks about what happens when options are exercised. The tax treatment for options is quite different than the tax treatment for RSUs. And you may also have cases where RSUs have vested and the employee has either sold them or hasn't sold them. But if they are to be sold, there'll be capital gains tax that you may want to calculate. Again, we can go in deep in the weeds. Now, I want to talk about a fairly recent case in California, and I don't even know if I pronounce it right. I think it may be the McElwain case. This is really fascinating. So there may have been cases in the past, and there were often more cases in the past, where options could be exercised, right? They did have an intrinsic value. They could be exercised. But the employee, and this is after the divorce, this is after the divorce is final, they could be exercised, but the employee ex-spouse didn't want to exercise them because he or she did not want them to show up as income on their W-2, because when they're exercised, they are now going to show up as income and be taxed. And if you have no income, you can't pay child support on no income, right? So now this court case has said, once those options are in the money, meaning they have value, even if they're worth $1, if the employee does not want to exercise the options, they still have to pay child support based on the value. Okay, that means he or she may have to come up with money out of pocket if they want to hold their options.
Wow.
And we don't know the implications for spousal support because the case did not address spousal support, but obviously it's coming up because we treat these very similarly. And it did not address privately held companies. So as a financial advisor, I don't really, the policy, I understand why this case came to be because people were gaming the system, but it's also awful if it's just as a financial planning perspective that you're forcing people to exercise options when it may not be the optimal time to do so, when the stock price may go up in the future and it, anyway, so it's a very interesting case. Okay, so other issues, because we're gonna probably take questions soon, but let's talk about other issues to negotiate if you have a case where one or both clients have RSUs or options. Okay, options can be repriced if the company stock price is in the gutter and the company doesn't want to lose employees, they may reprice the options. Well, what if, based on the Nelson formula, the other spouse, the non-employee spouse, had received credit in that vesting, and now they're being repriced and a new vesting schedule is released? Does that mean that the non-employee spouse has less of these options? That's something to think about. This often happens a lot in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, especially in product development. I mean, these engineers, these software people, they are constantly moving from company to company, and they may have RSUs that have not yet vested. And the new company hires them and says, we're going to make you whole. We're going to give you all these new options or RSUs that you would have earned over time. Well, again, is that non-employee spouse losing his or her community property interest? What about accelerated vesting at retirement, like Lily talked about, when all of these now become vested at once, when you had thought they would be vested over time? This totally impacts the value of the community property versus the separate property. And then tax calculations and true-ups be handled. You may want to have a CDFA or CPA involved in this. Before we go to questions, are there any other issues, Lily, that you've seen anecdotally in this kind of work?
No, I think this is really thorough and I'd love to hear some questions.
Okay, all right. Well, so we're going to bring Steve back here. I see Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hello, this has been really fascinating, and we do have a lot of excellent questions from the participants. So do you want me to just dive right in? Ready to take some?
Dive in, man.
All right. Okay. All right. So I'm wondering, or this participant's wondering, do couples decide to stay together when they understand the reality check, in quotes, reality check concerning money? So they start working with either of you and they put their hands up like, oh my God, this is just too much. We're going to spend all this time to figure it out. And in the end, we're not going to have much. Did you have like a Rolodex of family therapists or marital mediators to get them back on track possibly?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lily, and then I'll address it. Go ahead.
I would say it happens frequently and they're angry at each other that they don't have a good grasp of their financial situation. And it just like pours fuel on the whole process because they've not purposely communicated about their financial circumstances, or they've felt ignorant about them and they really have a difficult time moving through that. And it just adds to all the other stressors, I think. I've seen very few people who have actually said, we don't enjoy each other, we don't like each other, we want a new life, but we can't afford it, so let's stay married. I haven't seen that very often.
So you're saying more often than not, they do work through it and they still end up getting the divorce.
Yeah.
Even if it means that their financial situation has to be dramatically changed and maybe they have to alter their lifestyle significantly, they'll still more times than not work through the divorce.
More often than not, it's not significantly changed. They just didn't understand what their financial situation was. I mean, I've had couples that have had hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and thought everything was just peachy keen. So it's the reality of the situation, either of the lack of planning, the lack of saving, the lack of communicating over money that hits them at the same time they're going through this divorce when they thought they would be free, afterwards and able to live how they thought they wanted to.
Yeah, and I specifically offer a package for this. Usually it has been wives coming to me. Now I have couples coming to me. I have an It Could Happen package where I literally walk them through. I'm not a mediator, but I pretend, I say, we're going to go through financially what you would do in mediation. You would disclose your assets, debts, income, and expenses. And I'm going to run what ifs on child and spouse support for you. So people come to me secretly when they're like, should I stay in this horrible marriage? Can I, and sometimes they'll come to the conclusion, maybe they want to stick it out, right?
Mhm.
And then I've had couples come to me and we do this and they'll say same thing. So knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Another question that's actually come up and it's come up in some of the mediations I've worked on is with the age of retirement varying so much now between early 60s and now mid 70s or never even retiring at all, can someone who's making, let's say, their peak earning potential say, okay, I'm 65 now, I'm just going to stop working now, even though they're quite healthy? At what age can someone say, okay, I'm done, knowing full well that they may be saying that, to have a better outcome in their support requirement?
Laura, you want to answer first?
So in California, my understanding is that you cannot be required to work past 65 just to pay support. I'm sure there's tons of nuances around that, but that's the general thought. This is very difficult, Steve. I think we all, CDFAs and mediators, are facing this more and more as more people work. And I often ask, when I'm often the financial advocate for the wife, and I'll ask her, is your husband a workaholic? If he's a physician, he may very well work past 65. I just get them to tell me what their sense of this is, because if they're continuing to work, they're going to continue to pay support. But by the same token, I want to cover everyone's expectations. I let people know full well, he may be cranking out hundreds of thousands of dollars now, but if he decides at 68 he doesn't want to work, there's going to be a modification of support.
Some states have actually legislated that support stops at full retirement age, even if you continue to work. And I see that as an enormous threat for a lot of families across this country. On the other hand, there were people who were paying alimony from their savings, well into their 80s and saying, why am I having to do this?
Mhm.
So it's complicated. There's no easy answer on this one. I had a doctor who completely burned out. He was head doctor at a nursing home, and he had 32 people die within the last 6 months. And
Oh.
he just went through a mental breakdown and said, I can't work any longer. And he was 58. And they were going through a divorce, and they reconciled. And she recognized how fragile he was. And that was, one thing. I've had another person who wanted to retire early, makes a lot of money. And the incentive to allow him to retire early is that she gets a bigger piece of something, given the stepping down of the ages, right? So we're all creative. We're in mediation and we're in collaborative, which enables us to come up with the more creative solutions.
So let me actually ask you about one situation I currently have with one of my clients, and they're not in a graying divorce, but this has come up often. These particular clients, they own income property together, and I'm sure some of these graying divorce couples own businesses and own properties.
Mhm.
And especially if there's a business that may be very difficult to value, and even more so, even if it was valued, even more difficult for one party to buy out the other. in your agreements, do you ever have situations in which some of the income property is retained jointly, even during the graying divorce years where they've moved on and they each can live off of that income? And if so, how do you generally structure that? And do you get a third party trustee to hold it, or what do you do in those kind of situations if those ever come up?
I'll
Either
jump.
one of you. Yeah.
I'll jump. So I've had recently a couple of people who have only income properties. And I think, it's challenging because not only do they own the properties together, they own the mortgages together. And so the rent is held in escrow accounts and it goes toward the properties. And now we're having to find out how much of that income can be diverted for support purposes, right? Because now you're having two households from one. So it's where you peel every layer back to find out, do they really want to keep all these properties? Could they go ahead and sell one of them so they could get some cash? And then they could pay down some mortgages and then one person could own outright that property. Or do they divide the rental income? And by the way, Family Law Software does a great job, just a plug, of enabling you to allocate not just rental expenses, but rental income and property ownership. So, you can get as detailed as you need to be, but there are no straightforward answers. I think.
But in general, you're not opposed to the idea of a couple holding assets together, even post-divorce?
I'm biased against it. I'm all about simplicity, and I like to remind people that they're gonna, do you want to be in a business partnership with this person 5 years from now, what have you? I'm always, again, it's their choice, but I always like to walk them through the what ifs, what the future holds. You're going to be able to communicate with this person as a business partner. You're going to trust this person. And I always say, let's look at the simple answers first that are fair, and then we can go more complex. I mean, it's the same thing when people want to own the primary residence together for 6 years till Johnny's 12, similar issues.
Okay. So this next one's interesting. Do you involve the adult children of older divorcing couples? Never ever? Has that ever come up?
I have never had them in the meetings with me or the divorcing couple. I will share with you a really heart-wrenching story, because this is why it's so important about adult children. I was mediating with a couple, and they had put 3 of their 4 children through the school of their choice, and they had saved all their money for doing that. And they were a working class family. Education was their priority. The 4th was about to go off to school when they had this divorce. And there was very little money left to divide between them, and mostly retirement accounts. And so one spouse really wanted to use the retirement accounts to fund the education, to be on a parity with the other children. He owed that to his children, he felt. And the woman was terrified she would have nothing to live on in retirement. And that was the glitch of how do we handle the equity or the parity between our children and they'd never been in debt. Do we take out debt? Do we not take out debt? Do we put at risk our retirement? I think these are very hard stories to go through. And you really have to get to a place of where they both understand they can't compel the other person to do something if they want to be divorced. I mean, you can't compel somebody to give away their retirement for the education of a child, but at the same time, you can't compel somebody to go into debt to fund their child either. And these are majority age children. They're not easy answers.
So in general, so there's a question came in, how many mediation sessions, meetings with the clients do you usually need to resolve a gray divorce? And I'll add to that, does that tend to be more sessions than with a couple that maybe has a shorter term marriage?
Absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So it just, and do you have a number, or is it just, it can range, it just really depends how cooperative they are and how sense of urgency?
Yeah, I mean, the longer, here's the difficulty. Again, in California, where we have separate property reimbursements, you know, if you've been married, I mean, I have couples that have been married, you know, 20, 25 years, and they're trying to make separate property claims, and we're gonna have to trace, well, you know, do you have your, you know, your real estate paperwork from that long ago? Do you have a 401k statement from that long ago? So I just find that the older couples typically have more assets. There may be more separate property, inheritances that were used for upgrades of properties, and it's just more complicated, just more issues to address.
So there's
And-
no, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would just add, because it's more complicated, generally speaking, financially, that there's usually one spouse who's a little bit less knowledgeable, less sophisticated, less experienced, which means that you're spending more time with that person to educate them about all the issues.
Okay, so this next question I'm going to ask each of you to answer from your own histories, because I know sometimes myself, as a CDFA myself, I come into situations where there's I wish I had been there earlier. So this question is, what decisions would you want to unwind for your client? So let's say they had, you know, already gone through starting the divorce process, starting the mediation process. And by the time they've reached you, maybe they've already made a decision. Maybe they've already done something that you think to yourself, oh, you know, what would have I done differently, or what could have they done differently if I had known them then? I thought that might be useful for the participants to know as well, as we work with all of our clients, to keep something in mind to make sure that they maybe don't go down the wrong fork in the road. So I'll start with Lori.
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand the question again. What specifically, can you rephrase that?
Sure. So have you ever had situations where a client comes to you and they've already made prior decisions that, let's say, were negative for them, that you wish that you would have been able to be involved in the situation earlier to potentially have them not make such a detrimental decision for themselves?
Absolutely. Woman kept the house, now has to sell the house, you know, X years later. Or they didn't put any discussion about how expenses for college age children would be addressed between the two of them. I mean, I can't tell you how many women come to me years after their divorce and just complaining about what a crappy experience it was, and how the financial decisions they made, and they were not knowledgeable. I mean, it's from A to Z.
I would just add two things. I always have a caveat. If somebody comes to me at the 11th hour or the midnight hour and they say, could you just review my agreement because I'm going to court tomorrow? Or could you just do this? My answer is, if I tell you that the whole thing is horrible, what are you going to do about it? If I tell you that the whole thing is great, what are you going to do about it? I mean, they need to understand that there has to be a purpose to the involvement on an after fact, right? It's after the fact that we're called in to just give validation for something. But if it's not warranted, what are they going to do with that? So most of the time, I will say, you know, it's too late. It's sort of like having a prenup the night before you're getting married, right? It's almost worthless.
So Lily, you make an amazing point, because I never really thought about this way, but almost all agreements, let's say if they're even made, let's say it's even a divorce agreement that's made in middle age, it eventually will affect someone who's in their graying years, right? And that might be, it might have something within that agreement that 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road really is very negative for them. So I guess the good advice to all of us as mediators is, think not about how this agreement is going to affect, you know, the couple, or as financial advisors, how this agreement is going to affect the couple, not just now and getting them through this, but what is this really going to mean for them over the long term? And when we advise our clients, if we're mediators, to have it thoroughly reviewed by their own CDFAs or financial advisors, there's a real reason for that, because we don't want them to have, you know, unfortunately, unexpected surprises many years down the road. So future graying divorce, you know, even if they're
The
sort of in
number
middle
one,
age.
let's just recap this. Nobody wants to run out of money. Nobody wants to outlive their money. So, you know, you're not just negotiating for now, you're negotiating for the rest of, you know, what's going to be the impact on the rest of your life. Are you going to live on the street? I mean, I'm being hyperbolic here, but you know what I mean.
So I've got a question. We probably only have time for a couple more questions. There's so many coming in. So if the divorce is not final and the spouse passes away, the spouse who dies has put his money in someone else's name. How does the surviving spouse get the money and community property?
I'm
That's
sorry,
sort of
what
a
do you mean?
specific
Another
question.
name.
So
So, okay,
it's either a state or probate law that probably then comes into play. I mean, if they file for divorce and he's died,
so let's say someone's in the middle of a divorce situation and it's not final, and that spouse dies, but that spouse has actually taken the money and put it in someone else's name, not the surviving spouse. Well, this sounds like a complicated case.
well, actually, it's against automatic orders, isn't it?
Yes, in California too.
They would have, yeah. So if they disobeyed or didn't comply with automatic restraining orders for property transfers, or transmutation, I'm sure the divorce filing itself has a clawback on that, that you can put it back to the marital estate. Don't you think, Lori?
Well, I know that we have the ATROs for a reason, and that you're not, when you're, the divorce is going through divorce, you're not supposed to be moving funds like that without informing the other spouse and so forth, or changing beneficiaries on insurance policies or anything like that. So I don't know what the remedies are, though.
All right, maybe I'll get one last question in. Considering that a couple is divorcing each other, but not their children, are there ways to put child support into a trust, college fund, or other entity? If joint ownership is not determined by date of separation or divorce, given that the children are not being divorced, would the rise in value of support assets be positively protected? So I just read that quote. Maybe you can understand
Okay,
the
well, there's a
question
couple of things. So if there's 529 college savings plans, you have to be aware that actually only one parent can own those. I don't know of any situation where it can be joint ownership of those. Lily, have you seen that different?
Yeah, I have actually, just
Okay.
recently. You have to
Okay.
ask the custodian or the state custodian.
Okay, so I just think that it's really important. This is what's missing, because typically in California, unless there's a special needs situation, child support's going to end at 18 or 19, max, whatever, high school, and the parties fail to negotiate something between the two of them regarding this.
Hey there, Nancy. Did you want to say anything at the end here?
I just wanted to say, I actually had something to throw in there. Remember that 529 plans are actually owned by the parents and are not children's assets. And sometimes they end up getting divided in the divorce because they're marital funds or community property. There's certainly a tax consequence if you don't use them for education, but you can change the beneficiary and use them for golf school or sailing lessons or some other educational pursuit.
Oh,
Accredited sailing lessons.
Of course.
so
529 plans can kind of be a little bit of a touchy area when you bring up the fact that they're not really the kids' assets. And often then, guilt comes into play.
So you're saying potentially one parent could take those assets saying, I'll keep them for the kids, but then as soon as the divorce is final, go off to Switzerland skiing
Yes,
with
and
those
he
funds.
did. I have a case where he did.
Oh, that's
Yep.
that's quite awful. So
Yeah.
Bouvier's back too. I think we're out of
All
time.
right.
I think we
thank you
could
for
devote
allowing me to
we could
sponsor
probably
this.
devote an entire
you.
day to the issues of graying divorce, and that might be another FMI that Terry might want to hold just on this, because the issues were fascinating. And I'm sure all the participants, even though we can't see them, they're putting up their jazz hands and thanking you very much for a great presentation.
Thank
And
you. I
I'll
just
turn
want
it.
to,
Oh,
Steve,
go
I
ahead.
just want to interject one really quick comment that because we all live in different states, that neither Lori nor I are talking about law, and we don't give legal advice, but just in the experience of working with the legal agreements and seeing what's been drafted, those are some of our comments. So I just wanted to add that because we're both financial and we're not lawyers, but thank you.
And thank you
Thank
both
you,
so
Lily.
much. And we're all doing our jazz hands for you. And I'll turn it over to Bouvier.
Thank you. So thank you, Lily and Lori, for that wonderful presentation. Nancy for being a sponsor to this workshop, and Steve for being such a great host. So right now we have a 15-minute break from 1:45 to 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, we will begin our closing plenary where SCMA Star Award recipient Bill Eddy will do a brand new presentation on new skills for parents in and out of mediation. So see you all in 15 minutes, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.